Does anyone of you what a mutual session is? Was it there at the time when you joined Mahindra?
No, ma.
Okay, so what we generally do is for all the students who are coming now, we organize some sessions for them. So for the prospective students, we organize a few sessions. So it's basically for your juniors who are now joining the institute. So what we'll do is I'll leave slightly early, like I think 15 minutes early I'll leave. So the plan is for the first 30 minutes, we are going to talk about some technicalities today, and in the last 15 minutes or 20 minutes, we'll continue with the exercise. So I'll give you the instructions for the exercise and I'll leave afterwards. I hope you remember what the exercise was. So all of us together, we are going to edit the article for how a computer system boots. Okay, now we are moving to, I would say that now we are formally in today's lecture starting operating systems. So whenever we talk of operating systems, the very first topic or the very first concept which a programmer should know about is a process. So till now, whatever we have discussed, there were some very basic details. So we talked a bit about computer architecture, we talked about what an operating system is, and now is the part in the course where we are starting with it and we'll try to understand how do we design an operating system and what kind of codes do we have to write, what all we have to take care of. So as we discussed in our very first few lectures, the first thing which we are going to look after is about the processes, about the programs which are running on our system. So some things might be repeated here and there, keep up with me. So when we looked at the task manager, all of us noticed that there were certain processes running in our system. So for some of you, it was 108, it was more than 100 for almost all of us. So the first question is, why does task manager call all these processes and not programs? So generally an end user, he knows about programs. End users do not know about what are processes. So we always say that programs run on computer. Now what is a process? Can anyone answer this question?
When a program is being executed, it's called a process.
Okay, so Nikhil says when a program is being executed, we call it a process, and that is correct. So if you look at the formal definition of process in any book, it says that it's a program in execution. And now can you define what is a program in execution? So we are saying if a program is getting executed, we call it a process, and we know how does a program gets executed. So all the instructions, they get loaded in RAM. CPU starts fetching these instructions one by one and starts executing them. So can I say that a process is nothing but the machine level code in your main memory, or is there something more to it? So I see a program in execution is nothing, right? It is the machine level instructions which your CPU can understand, and that's it, is it? Okay. So there is this very nice analogy which is given in the book by Tannenbaum. You can also refer to it after the lecture. So what he says, the difference between a program and process, it can be explained by this analogy here. So assume you were baking a cake and you do not know how to bake a cake. So you are going to use a recipe for it. So what is recipe here? So recipe is nothing but it is a set of instructions which you have to follow one by one. You are also doing something similar to the computer CPU. You read an instruction, you execute it, you decode it and you execute it. Fetch, decode, execute. That is how CPU works, and that's all it knows about. Right, so recipe here is the set of instructions. So I would say that this recipe in your hand, it is the program. But when you actually bake that cake, that is a process, and I can call that it is the process of baking a cake. So what additional things does that process has? So this set of instructions is definitely included in the process, because you cannot bake a cake if you do not have this recipe. So this set of instructions need to be there because you are going to look at this set of instructions one by one and execute them. So program is one of the part of process. What else is included in the process here? You will need some resources, right? So you might need an oven, you might need all these ingredients which you see here, and maybe someone else in your home is using the oven, so you'll have to talk with them, schedule and things like that. So those are all the additional things which are there in a process. So process is something on the top of a program. Or so when a program executes, it requires much more things than simply the set of instructions. Let us see what those things are. Assume that this is a C program which you have written, and it gives you an executable file in your system, and now you double click on it, or you type a ./a.out in the command prompt, and it goes in the RAM in the machine level language. So let's talk about how this will look in the memory. What all should be there in the memory corresponding to a program? So first of all these instructions have to be there so that CPU can execute them one by one. So that is some text, or these are the instructions. Will this program need some more memory? Can you tell me what are all the memory requirements for this program? So whenever you write a C program, in which all ways it uses memory. So now we have seen that one way of using memory is that all these instructions have to be loaded in memory so that CPU can read them. Other than that, where all do you require memory for a program?
Stack and heap.
Stack and heap. Okay. What else? Okay, what are stacks and heaps? Let's discuss very briefly about them. So stack and heap, we know them as data structures. Stack is a last in first out data structure. Heap is another data structure in the form of a tree. But why will a process need a stack and heap? I do not have anywhere a stack and heap defined here in the program. Then why do a program needs this stack and heap here? Any ideas?
Ma'am, heap is for memory allocation of objects, right?
Heap is for memory allocation of objects. So whatever you are dynamically allocating here, so all of us would have heard that any memory which is dynamically allocated, it is allocated on a heap. So this thing goes in heap. And why we use heap for this? Because heap is probably a data structure which can contract and expand. So this part of your memory which this program is using, it can contract and extract on your demand. So let's say if you increase this memory, so you can use a realloc function for that. You can increase the memory size for this array A, or you can decrease the memory size for this array A. All that is achieved with the help of heap. So this is some memory which your program requires at the runtime. Good. What about stack? Why do we need a stack? Why will a program need a stack?
When there is an order to maintain, right?
When there is an order to maintain. And what does Mihika? Yes, go on.
Ma'am, it's continuous memory blocks.
It's contiguous memory blocks. Okay.
And it's also used for recursion.
It is also used for recursion. So we got some answers here. So Mihika said it was to maintain order, and then another answer was contiguous block of memory, and another answer was it is used in recursion. Basically all of these answers are correct. So what is happening? You actually need a stack to maintain order. That is the most basic answer, I would say. So the mostly we write C programs, we always have functions there, although this program doesn't have one. So you might have a function sitting here, and this function will be having some definition, and you might be calling this function here. So if you see here what is happening in your program, So when we talked about CPU, it knows how to execute instructions one by one. But what is happening? The moment the CPU is executing this instruction, after that you are doing a function call. So it should actually go and execute the instruction for that function. It is not the next instruction. And you achieve it with the help of stack. So what happens here, your main function is running and now you are calling some other function, right? So let's say I was executing line number 182 in main function. And then there was a call to some other function. Now my CPU, it knows, so there are some jump instructions in assembly language which enable this. So CPU will go and start executing some other function somewhere else. So let's say it started executing this function 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and now this function is finished. Where should it come back? It should come back to 183, but CPU does not have memory like humans. It cannot remember. So you have to store that somewhere, and that somewhere is stack. So the stack will hold all the necessary things. It will hold which instruction you were at in the form of a program counter, or just a second, in the form of an address. Right? That is one thing. There are some more things which stack holds. So these can be state of certain variables. So you see here is an integer n here, but when I go to that new function won't be knowing anything about n. So you know that if this function doesn't have a variable n, if it try to access n, it will give you an error. So there are certain variables which this function was using, which we call local variables. So you need to store all those local variables and stuff. And what is this entire thing called? If you have heard of it, it is called activation record. So whatever bookkeeping you have to do for a particular function, you have to restore it back after executing another function, and that everything is pushed onto something which is called activation record. And these activation records, they are maintained on this stack here. So this is another thing any program will need. So here we are talking about a simple C program, but it holds for any program in your computer. They'll have functions. Okay, what else? So we have a stack. I can say that this stack, it is corresponding to the functions in my C program. This heap here, I'm having it for dynamic memory allocation. This text part, it is for the instructions. Have I left something out? Look at this program. So assume that I declared a variable over here, int y. Where will this y go? Int y equals to 10, right? Or generally we do, let's say I can declare a variable const, and let me say const float pi equals to, and I give the value of pi here. And I'm going to use this value of pi throughout my program. So where will this pi be stored? It's not a, yes, Ananta, go on.
Ma'am, it will be stored in the stack.
Will it?
Because
So stack holds the temporary variables which are local to a function, right? So we have one more portion for this. Yes.
Ma'am, but doesn't stack get used by the compiler? So when we're defining a variable, the compiler will choose where it goes. So won't it go in the stack?
Okay, so stack is used for those variables which are present inside functions. So we also say that stack, it holds your temporary variables. Temporary variables means the variables which keep changing when you jump across different functions. So the idea here is, see, this stack will hold some activation record for the main function. Then you jump to some other function. You are in that some other function. That function won't know anything of whatever activation record was here. But that function, it's still in your program, and that function can still use this pi, right? So I cannot push this stack in, push this pi in the stack. If I push in the stack, it should be local to this main function from where I'm calling it. So we have one more portion for this, and we call it the data portion. So this data portion here, it maintains the global variables. I will look into what you are saying. So definitely the way you store these variables in memory might change. Right, so but this is the most basic architecture. So these are some things which we need, and there is one more part here which I'll talk about when we go further. So corresponding to a program, when I look at it in memory, it's definitely a process by the time it comes into memory because it is alive. And these are some things which it need to have. Its instructions, all the global variables, all the local variables, and all the dynamically allocated memory. Okay. So this is about one process. But when we talk about our system, there are multiple processes. So let's say I was baking this cake. I was looking at the recipe and I was baking this cake. So this was one process I was carrying out. And then suddenly there has been a medical emergency in my home. So let's say someone just cut his finger. So I go there, I then fetch the first aid book. I read another instructions from there and give a first aid to that person and then come back. So I'm doing some kind of switching here. So that job was at a higher priority, that somebody got hurt. I treated him and then we came back to the previous process. So similar to how we human beings shift, my CPU, it also has to switch between the processes, and that's the whole aim of multitasking, which we have been talking ever from the starting of this lecture. So CPU has to switch between these processes, but the problem is CPU doesn't know how to switch. CPU only knows fetch, decode, and execute. So as a system programmer, you are going to write the operating system, and it is your job to make the computer switch from one process to another. How will you do that? So look at it like this. So assume that I double clicked on 3 programs in my computer. So each of the program became a process, and all these processes came in memory. So based on what we have discussed here, this is how a process looks in memory. So now your processes come and they sit in the memory here. So this is the memory space for process 1, memory space for process 2, memory space for process 3, and all of them have these parts. So they have a stack, heap, data, text, stack, heap, data, text, so on and so forth. Now, what is happening with the CPU? So as we discussed about CPU, you remember the architecture of CPU. So we have certain program counters, certain instruction address registers, and a lot of general purpose registers and stuff like that, which it uses to execute the instructions. So what this CPU was doing, so it was reading the instructions of a particular program. Let's say it was executing the instructions for process number 3. Let's say it is a C code and it is executing the 14th line of this C code. And then you realize that it has been a long time that the CPU is just executing this C program. I also want to give this CPU to other programs. So you decide to switch. Now, do you see what is involved in this switching? Now you want to stop process 3 from running and you want this CPU to start executing this process over here. So it should stop here executing process 3 and it should start with process 2. So similar to how we were doing in the function calls, when you are jumping from one function to another, you have to store the state of the previous function. You have to do a similar thing here. Right? So when I'm coming from process 3 to process 2, all these things will change here. Your instruction address register will change. It should now point to some of the instruction of process 2, then what all are the variables of process 2, what all global variables or stuff is there, they all should be loaded in the relevant registers in the CPU and stuff like that. So overall, I can say that CPU changes its state probably. So previously it was in a state so that it could execute process 3. Now it has to execute process 2. But what is the problem? I was at the 14th line in process 3. And now I came and I started executing process 2. And then after some time, CPU, it has to go back to process number 3. And from where it has to start? It doesn't have to start from the beginning. It has to start at the 14th line. And maybe till the 14th line, I have changed certain variables. Maybe A was 0 in the first line and in the 13th line, it became 10. So by the time I come back to the 14th line, the value of A here, somehow it should have become 10. And how will you do that? So a process also stores that. So when you look at this portion which we have left out, this is what is stored there. So you can say a program counter, which instruction you were probably executing, and certain registers. Basically, you can say you can store the values of all the CPU registers here, because I have to get my CPU in the same state where it was. before leaving the process. And so I have some more space here for taking care of that state. So it is similar to us. If I was baking a cake, I would have already processed certain things. Now I'm going to give this medical aid to a person. When I come back, I have to start where I was. So I have to remember all those things. So as a human, we can remember, but for a computer, we'll need to have a mechanism for making him remember. So that is the another part which will be there in the memory for a process, so that it can remember how much of you say how much of this text section was executed, what were the changes in data, what were the changes in stack, so on and so forth. Okay, so I hope this is clear how a process looks like in memory. Here we were having two things. So here still we have talked only about two things. One is the CPU, one is the memory, and we have said that it is the job of the system programmer to make the CPU switch between these processes, and how to make that switch is not very easy. So we are going to talk about that in this chapter. So before starting, let me ask you this question. So we say that whenever I run a program, it becomes a process. So process is nothing but a program in execution. So what do you think is the kind of relation between programs and process? And when I'm saying relation, it is the relation you would have studied in a course on discrete mathematics. So is it a one-to-one relation, many to one, one to many, or many to many? Anyone? Okay, let me explain the question further. So one-to-one means, what does it mean? Corresponding to one program, right? So these are all, this is a set of programs in my computer, this is the set of processes in my computer. So one-to-one means corresponding to every program, there will be one process. There is a one-to-one correspondence. So corresponding to one program, there is one process, and corresponding to one process, there is one program. Many to one means there can be many programs which could be mapped on the same process. One to many means there is just one to many means one program, it can be mapped to multiple processes. And many to many, I think you can now understand according to this. So there can be many programs, they can be mapped to many processes, there can be many processes which can be mapped to many programs. Which do you think is correct?
Ma'am, it should be one to many.
Okay, Ananta says it is one to many. Any other answer?
One to many.
One to many. Okay, why it should be one to many?
Ma'am, because a program can create multiple processes, but a process can't be owned by multiple programs.
Exactly. So I can double click on a C file as many number of times as I want, and when I'll double click on it, every C program will have its own image in memory. Every C program. So this is the same C program. I clicked on it once, and it became a process in the memory. When I clicked on it second time, it became second process in the memory, so on and so forth. So I can have multiple images of the same program, and if that is the case, so here it can be the case that process 1, process 2, process 3, all of these correspond to the same program, right? So which part of this memory image will be the same and which one will vary, right? So if you look at it, if all of these, they correspond to the same program, so the text part will be the same, the set of instructions is same, the C code which you have written remains the same, but all the other parts here, not each and every part, but most of the parts here will vary. So your program counter, your instruction address register, maybe the state of variables, maybe you were creating a variable randomly, so all those things will change. The text part remains the same. Okay. Now let's look at the another view of a process. So till now we have looked at a process from the view of a memory. We have seen how a process looks in the memory. Now as a system programmer, we look at it in another way. So we look at a process as if it's a living entity. So processes, they actually take birth, they execute for some time, and they die. That's how we'll be looking at processes for most of this chapter. So now the question is how a process takes birth. How is a process born? Can you give me some examples? How do processes born? So we know of a few ways in which you can convert a program in a process.
While starting an application, a program.
By starting an application. So maybe I can double click a file, although it's a right click here. Maybe I can just go right click and open. That is the one way. So those are application programs which we run. So whenever we double click on a file or whenever we run a C code, that is one way of how we create a process in our system. So let me call those application programs or user programs. So we can run. Okay, those are some of the processes, how they are born. Apart from what we are running, what we are executing, what are the type of processes we can have?
System processes.
System programs, okay. So system programs, they come here. So this diagram, I have actually used it for kernel, which is the brain of your operating system. So the moment you start your computer system, if you would have read about booting, we say that booting is all about loading the operating system in RAM. And once operating system gets loaded, CPU starts executing them. And what is that operating system? They are nothing but system programs. And to run, operating system is also present on hard disk. And it starts getting executed as soon as you switch on, you boot your system, right? So at that time, those are certain programs which will be converted into processes, but it is done implicitly by my system. So I call them the system programs. Okay, and there is this third category which we call daemons. What are daemons on your computer?
Ma'am, is it malware?
It can be malware. Malware is an example of it, yes. So these are all the programs. Yes, Ananta.
Ma'am, it can be background processes to clean up other processes.
Exactly.
Like in Java, we have a daemon that always runs.
Exactly. Right. So all those background processes, we call them daemons. So you would have noticed when we opened Task Manager, there were three kinds of processes. So one was my processes or user processes, then there were background processes, and then there were system processes. So there are some background processes. So they might include the processes for your antiviruses, as Mihika said, and there might be some processes which will be cleaning up your system, some processes which will be maintaining the clock of your system, so on and so forth. So there are three ways in which processes are born. Okay. There is one more way, we'll talk about it, and that one more way is a process is a living entity, and just like living beings, one process, it can give birth to another process. Right? So one process can create another process. We'll talk about that. That is another way processes are born. So these three ways, when you get your processes from the hard disk and start executing them, all these three will come there. And there is another way, when a process is running, it gives rise to some more process. It gives birth to some process. Okay, so we'll talk more about the process life cycle in the next lecture. So till now we have seen that a process is born and then the process executes, or I can say the process runs and it dies. Right? After it is finished execution, now there are a lot of things here. When a process executes, a lot of things happen, and we are going to talk about those things tomorrow. Okay, so not tomorrow, on the next, today is Wednesday, right? On the next Monday. Okay, we'll stop here. Let's start with the exercise. Just give me a moment. Okay, I hope all of you remember what the exercise was. You can see a link in the chat window. It's a document on OneDrive. So I request all of you, you just open it from your Mahindra University IDs so that I know who is editing it. So I can see the names there and the version history. So I want all of you to together edit this document. Maybe you can get started. Do not copy paste things from internet. Try to write it in your own words and be as descriptive as possible. So once all of you are finished editing this document, we will discuss about it. What are the steps involved in booting? I already see many of you editing it here. So I'll stay with you for the next 4 and 5 minutes and then I'll leave. The document will still be open on my system. Even I'll make some changes here wherever I feel there is a gap. Very good. So I see Vancha Vinesh editing it. I have Shagufta, Rutvik, Yuvraj, Rutvik. Good. Let's see what's the shape in which you can bring this document to. Abhinav is writing about BIOS. Okay, so work on it and we'll look at the status of this document in our Monday's lecture. But I logged this document after, let's say, at today 5 p.m. So you can make any changes to it by today 5 p.m. Another thing regarding the assignment, I'll email you the exact details, what to study, and we'll have a very small quiz on Monday. Based on only that, based on only exactly those lines which I ask you to study. And it will be an easy quiz. Okay, everyone. So I'll take a leave now. You can also leave this Google, this Teams meet and keep working on the document.